All right, so the notes should have just posted.
I didn't want to take it on Saturday night. I was like, I'll do the assignment. I'm not taking the quiz.
Okay, so we started with life in the oceans with our fishes, and we ended with our coelacanths, the descendants or the precursor for life on land with our lobed fin fishes. Wow. And now we are moving into amphibians, and so I'm going to go through the 5 characteristics of amphibians, the challenges that they had to overcome in order to be successful on land, how they were able to solve some of those issues, and then talk about the 3 orders that are within the amphibians. So 5 distinguishing features for the amphibians. First off, the presence of legs. So with our lobed fin fishes, I don't want to keep saying finches, it's fishes. They had bones in their fins, and they somehow were able to adapt into legs, so the fins became more leggish. So frogs and salamanders have 4 legs, and the caecilians lost their legs because they tend to just burrow, and that's kind of how they live. Lungs. Pair of lungs. Internal surfaces have much less surface area than the reptilian and mammalian lungs, so at least though that they have lungs. Cutaneous respiration, which means they breathe through their skin, so their skin has to be kept moist in order for the exchange to occur. Pulmonary veins. Now we have a heart, and everything travels in a closed circulatory system, much like in the fish, and then a partially divided heart, and you'll see that with the frog dissection, how it has 3 chambers, 2 atria, and a ventricle. So it does mix a little bit. It's not perfect, but it still gets the job done. And so now we have 2 separate pathways, and you'll see that with the pulmonary circulation and the systemic. So they had to overcome a lot of challenges in order to thrive on land. Amphibia means double life. So first off, they had to be able to kind of prop themselves off the ground so they wouldn't dehydrate or desiccate or dry out. So they have some limbs, and 4 limbs. The front limbs are a little bit smaller in the frogs. Gills, which was the adaptation in fish for them to respire, they had water to support them, and now we have lungs. Our heart muscle is a lot larger. It's not tubular like it is in the fish. They're still tied to water for reproduction because they lay eggs in the water. If they don't, the eggs will dry out. And they are still tied, obviously, to the water again to prevent their skin from drying out. So they hang out in wet, marshy areas. All right, so the first amphibian, our earliest fossils, is the Ignithostega. And fossil evidence shows that they had sturdy forelegs, very strong shoulder bones to kind of crawl, if you will, or drag itself onto the surface. Big ribs for the lungs and the heart, the thoracic cavity. So those are the earliest fossils of our amphibians. And then we have a transition fossil of fish to amphibians with the Tiktaalik. Had gills and scales like a fish, but its neck vertebrae is very similar to an amphibian. Okay, modern amphibians have 3 groups or 3 orders. First order is Order Anura, which is your frogs and toads. These guys do not have tails. They do live in a variety of environments, especially the toads. They tend to hang out in drier areas. Frogs have smooth, moist skin, excellent jumpers. Toads tend to have bumpy, dry skin, adapted to dry environments. Both types of species practice external fertilization, and then they will hatch into tadpoles. Okay, second order, Caudata, the salamanders, elongated bodies, long tails, still smooth, moist skin for all of them, lay eggs in water or in a moist place. But these guys practice internal fertilization. And then the third order, Apoda, Sicilians. So A kind of means without, and poda means limbs, so without limbs. These guys are burrowing amphibians. One look at it, you might think if it was just a giant worm. They have jaws with teeth, small eyes in some species, but they're often blind. And again, internal fertilization. There's not a lot of left of these guys, or a lot of these species left. And I think your book talks a little bit about their decline. Okay, moving on to review. Select the feature that does not distinguish living amphibians. B, shoulder muscles. Gnithostega represents, yep, C, the first amphibian. Okay, why aren't you moving forward? Okay, why was the evolution of the pulmonary veins important for amphibians? A, to move oxygen to and from the lungs. All right, reptiles. So again, talk about 3 big characteristics of reptiles, some major groups of the reptiles. I'm going to spend some time on synapsids and diapsids, which is the number of holes in their skull and why that's important. And then spend quite a few slides on amniotic eggs. So amphibians, first draft for survival on land, and now we have the reptiles with improved adaptations and innovations. Now we have the arrangement of legs to support the body's weight, so all pretty much they can lift their entire body off the surface. You're going to see that the lungs and heart are way more efficient, especially with the lungs. They actually do thoracic breathing, where with frogs, it's not true thoracic breathing. The heart is more efficient. You'll see 4 chambers in their heart instead of 3 like it was in the amphibians. Skin is with scales, and it minimizes water loss, so they're not moist. They don't do cutaneous respiration. And then the big one here, watertight coverings for eggs, so they can lay their eggs on land instead of being tied to the water. All right, 3 big characteristics for the reptiles. Amniotic egg, watertight eggs, and it has 4 different membranes. The chorion, the amnion, the yolk sac, and the aletois. So we have our shell, and then just inside is the chorion, which is responsible for respiration of gases, but water is not lost. The amnion is where the embryo kind of lies, and it's a fluid-filled cavity. Then you have a yolk sac, which is food for the developing embryo, and you might see some blood vessels connecting to the yolk sac there. And then an area for waste products for the embryo, because it's going through development, it is producing waste, and so that's where that is stored. So we have the same thing. We pretty much have all of these layers except, reptiles lay their eggs outside of their body, and we tend to keep it internal. So a diagram just showing the amniotic egg. You can see the outer shell, and then just inside is the chorion, which is responsible for respiration. Okay, here's the developing embryo. There's the amnion, the fluid that it's kind of hanging out in, the yolk sac for nutrition and food, and then there's where the waste product is excreted. Yeah, I think I took off some keywords. So. All right. Can I move on? So another diagram just showing, I believe this is a diagram I took from your book. So still showing the same pieces of the amniotic egg. Okay, second key characteristic is the dry skin. And the skin is made up of scales and they tend to overlap. It's the same protein that you find in our fingernails, keratin, as well as bird feathers and claws. You can see it's multi-layered, nerve cells, muscles underneath all of it. Scales can serve quite a few different functions like protection, sex recognition between males and females, social status, thermal regulation. So there's more than just water loss. And then thoracic breathing. So amphibians, yes, they have lungs, but they have to squeeze their throat, and that's why frogs do that whole thing with their throats. They're sucking in air, and then they have to like squeeze it to push it into their lungs. With reptiles, we actually have our rib cage expanding and contracting to do pulmonary breathing. So a diagram just showing how frogs breathe. So they bring it in, and you can see I don't know what that area is called, the throat enlarges, and then it squeezes it to the lungs, and then it pushes it back out. Okay, so there's been several reptilian groups that have appeared and then disappeared, but there's at least 3 major lineages, and they're all denoted by the holes in their skulls. So we have anapsids, synapsids, and diapsids. And so the anapsids, the current living species of the anapsids is the turtles, which means that they have no holes behind the eye socket there. Synapsids, you can see that it looks like they have 1 hole here, and eventually they gave rise to the mammals. And then your diapsids gave rise to other reptilian groups, and this also includes birds. Now, what's the significance about the holes behind the skulls? They served as attachment points for muscles. So with more holes, more muscles, stronger jaws, which means a more powerful bite. Just a diagram. I believe this is the diagram that's in your book. So synapsids. There's 2 groups of synapsids. The Pelycosaurus dominated for about 50 million years. 70% of all land vertebrates at one time are made up of these types of organisms. Steak knife teeth. And then we have the Therapsids, dominant for about 20 million years. Evidence of some endotherms, and 1 group of the Therapsids survived, and that is our mammals today. So all mammals have descended from 1 group of that. Okay, diapsids. The major group about the diapsids is the Archaeopteryx, and these guys were ectoderms. They gave rise to the crocodiles, dinosaurs, birds, but diapsids, most dinosaurs were diapsids. Modern characteristics of reptiles today: internal fertilization. Oh my gosh. Our circulatory system gets improved. We actually have a extended septum in the heart, which divides the heart into 4 chambers. Now we have 2 atria and 2 ventricles. So the next couple slides are going to compare the circulatory system between amphibians and reptiles. Okay, so here's the general scheme of an amphibian heart. Okay, so we have blood that enters, okay, to the ventricle, and then it gets pumped out to the rest of the body, and then it will eventually go to the lungs and then re-enter. But you can see that red and blue, they mix, so it's oxygenated blood mixed with deoxygenated blood, which means it's not as efficient. Okay, so now we're starting to see a whole septum that's being divided here. So now we're not going to have the mixing of oxygenated blood with reptilian or deoxygenated blood. So birds and mammals, it's completely closed. We have 4 chambers. Crocodiles, 4 chambers. Turtles, lizards, and snake, the heart is not 100% divided, so it's not a true 4-chamber, but at least the septum wall is there, so you get partial mix-in. Amphibians, partial mix-in. The fish, it's set up a little bit differently. So, okay, this slide just talks about how, like turtles, you know, they're able to be underwater for 20 to 30 minutes at a time, and they by holding their breath. And how they do that is they have a shunt that closes and directs blood, so it doesn't like go to, they don't have gills, they have lungs. So that blood just keeps being circulated until all the oxygen is pretty much gone, and then it will surface to breathe. So kind of a cool deal there. But moving on to the 4 groups of reptiles. So first order is the turtles and tortoises, the Cholonia. Turtles are the aquatic ones, tortoises, terrestrial. They don't have teeth, but they do have some pretty sharp beaks. Another big characteristic is a shell for protection. And the shell is made up of 2 parts, the carapace, which is the dorsal covering, that's the backside, and then the plastron, which is the ventral or belly side. All the vertebrae that they have is fused inside the carapace. So here's just some turtle skull diagram showing the ribs and how they're attached to the carapace. Cross section of a skeletal of a turtle. Second order, Rhinochocephala, the Toraturas. There's 1 species left, found on New Zealand. But the unusual feature is that they have this 3rd eye on their head, and that 3rd eye is called the parietal eye, and it just helps them alert when it has too much sun. Now, I was paging through the old college biology textbook, which was like from 2007, and then this year's, which is 2016. The old book said that there was 2 species of these guys left, and now there's only 1. Yeah. This guy right here, his name is Henry, and I forget what the name of his species is, but these guys, oh, it's right there. It takes 10 to 20 years for them in order to mature before they can reproduce. Okay, so you can see why their species is dying, because it takes so long for them to reach maturity. This guy right here lives at the some museum on New Zealand, and they named him Henry. He is still reproductively active at 111 years of age. Yeah.
Is he like that small?
Yeah. Yeah. So swipe right, right? Okay. Okay. 3rd order Squamata, lizards and snakes. Don't really care for these guys, but most of them are carnivores. Snakes, lack of limbs, movable eyelids, external ears, and a great number of vertebrae, and some species over 300. Lizards, iguanas, chameleons, geckos, and anoles. But they both are very agile and very quick, and they use it to catch their prey and avoid predators. You wouldn't believe it, but most snakes are actually non-venomous. Most species are. Lizards, I believe there's only 2 species that are venomous. The Gila monster and isn't the bearded guy? Yeah, they're poisonous. So a lot of lizards, remember, they can lose their tails and regenerate their tails. So, all right, so just nerd glasses here, talking about digestive system, how they can actually unhinge their jaw and devour prey that are larger than them. Gross. Teeth, lots of different dentations going on, especially with snakes and their fangs. So, yeah, some more fangs, just for those that enjoy snakes. I don't, but yeah, if you'd like to read up on venom and how that works, go for it. Tongues are also very diverse, and they do serve a lot of functions like capturing food, and they use it as a sensory organ. They can actually smell with their tongue. So, okay, I think this is supposed to say 4 and not 3. The 4th order of the reptilians, crocodiles and alligators. About 25 species left, These guys have been around for millions of years. Crocodiles nocturnal live in or near water. For alligators, there's only 2 species left. Okay, but they're all carnivores. Eyes on top, nostrils on top for how they hunt their prey. And then they have a valve in the back that prevents water from entering when they're feeding. So
what's the difference with crocodile?
locations, because I think alligators are the only things in North America, and then crocodiles are in Asia and Africa. I want to.
Crocodiles are way bigger too.
Are they? I don't know.
They have like a difference.
All right, select the proper name for reptiles with one hole in the size of the skull behind the eye. One hole. One hole. One hole. And apsids have 0.
Oh,
Let's see. No, that's 2.
Die means 2. So
E.
D.
it's D, guys. It's D. Synapsids.
C.
Synapsids. 1 hole. Synapsids. Diapsids. 2 holes. Anapsids. 0 holes. Okay, most Therapsids became extinct, but one group survived. What are today's living descendants from that group? C, the mammals. What feature of reptiles, found in birds and mammals as well, is considered its most important attribute because it allows reptiles to live in a variety of terrestrial habits?
D. Jaws.
No.
B.
B. A.
It's A, the amniotic eggs, because now they can move away from water. They can move away from water. All right, in most reptiles, oxygenated blood is re-pumped after leaving the lungs. In comparison, blood in fishes flows from the gills directly to the rest of the body. Which statement correctly compares the 2 modes of circulation? No, it's not equal efficiency. No way.
D.
Fish
B?
minimizes.
C.
It's C, it's faster. It is faster in reptiles than in fish. Okay, final group that I'm going to get through today are the birds. So I'll go through characteristics and then talk a little bit about where do birds come from. So the success of the birds mostly lies in the development of their feather. It's structurally unique in the animal world, not word. It did evolve from the reptilian scales, and it's obviously an adaptation used for flight. Birds belong to the class Aves, and they do resemble crocodiles in a few ways, like they both build nests, they both do parental care, and they both have a 4-chambered heart. No, birds descended from crocodiles. Okay, so feathers, a modified reptilian scale made of keratin, just like hairs and scales. 2 functions, flight and conserving heat. And the structure serves for function. The structure, it's super flexible, it's super light, so benefit for flight. And then the little barbs that come out, they help with warmth, they conserve heat. So modern birds do lack teeth. They have vestigial tails. They do retain some more reptilian characteristics that I don't think I mentioned on the previous slide, but the amniotic eggs, because birds lay eggs. And then, sorry.
So vestigial, that means
Vestigial means an organ that they really don't use. Like the tail feathers really don't serve really a purpose. Reptilian scales are present on the feet. So if you guys remember from Jurassic World, the opening scene. No. What?
Let's watch that.
The opening scene. Okay. Okay, never mind. How can you? Okay. All right. I'm just gonna move on. I'll come back to it. Just remind me at the end of this lecture.
I think I know where
No, you don't.
Yes! And you think it's like a dinosaur, and then they zoom out, and it's a freaking bird. It's just a bird. Okay. All right. Anyways, a little bit more about the feathers. So the tiny little pits that they have, we call them follicles, kind of like how we have follicles. There's a shaft in the middle, and everything kind of attaches to it. But if you look at a feather underneath a microscope, you can see that there's a lot of cross-linking going on, and that serves for the purpose of lift, for flight. So there's tiny little hooks they hook on, and it helps them fly. Skeleton is also adapted for flight. The bones are thin and hollow, and they are fused, making it a little bit more rigid than the reptilian skeleton. No other living vertebrate has a fused collarbone or a keeled breastbone. So that's another unique trait with birds. So that fused collarbone is the wishbone. So maybe during Thanksgiving dinner, you carve the turkey and then you let the wishbone dry and then you fight someone for it. And yeah, I think I've only done that once in my life. Otherwise, it's just, yeah. You do it all the time? Yeah. I don't really host Thanksgiving. That's not my jam. I always get stuck with Christmas. Okay, so the first known bird fossil, Archaeopteryx, size of a crow, really, really small, very long tail. I'll show you on the next slide the fossil imprint of the feathers. So there's presence of feathers on the wings and tails. The link between the Archaeopteryx and dinosaurs is the Archaeopteryx. Large feathers on tails and arms, but the arms were too short to be used as wings.
They look kind of funny.
Well, it's an artist rendition, but... Yeah, okay. So today's birds are basically feathered dinos, if you really think about it. Carve that turkey. Dino. So here's that fossil, not a great image, but you can see feather on that fossil imprint there. Some major groups, there's the Archaeopteryx, the transition from a true dinosaur to bird, and there's the first fossil of the bird to our modern birds. Modern birds, pretty diverse, but they do share some characteristics like efficient respiration. And the reason why they need to be very efficient is flight. It requires a lot of oxygen, a lot of cellular respiration, a lot of energy. So the cool thing about this efficient respiration is when it inhales, the lungs go all the way past the lungs, like all the way through to a set of anterior air sacs. And then it passes, it's just literally uses everything that it can. So reptilians, they were limited based on internal surface area, but now we're seeing a greater surface area with birds and a radical new design. So to show you what I mean by all the way through, I'm hoping this next diagram does justice. So here you can see the lung in pink here, and then we have some posterior air sacs and some anterior air sacs. So it breathes all the way through and all the way back out. So it's got lots of different sacs that allow it to get the energy it needs for flight. Efficient circulation, so we do have that ventricle that's completely cut off. They don't mix. Rapid heartbeats in some species. And then the third big characteristic is endothermy. Basically homeostasis. They can pretty much stay the same temperature. It's usually around 40 to 42 degrees Celsius, and feathers help them regulate that body heat. Whereas with our reptilians, and I didn't really spend a lot of time on their ectotherms, they use their environment to help them regulate their body heat. Okay, true or false? Today's birds are feathered dinosaurs.
True.
True, yeah. Okay, so I'm going to stop right here and finish the guided notes for you guys and try to get them out to you today. But if not, sorry, tomorrow.